Welcome, everybody, to Transition Tuesday. I am Elizabeth Hamblet. Perhaps you are here because you follow my work, and I've been very excited about promoting this. Um, Featured on the screen is my friend Kelley Challen. When I say friend and my idol, Kelley and I have gotten to know each other over the last few years, in part because she's doing such great work that I started following her and, kind of wormed my way into her life. So it's a great opportunity for us to chat. For those of you who are here and have never heard of me, because you know Kelley. And you know that Kelley has just branched out and started Kelley Challen Transitions. And so she has started her own business. She is available for consulting. She's a smart, smart person. And we just thought, hey, everybody likes alliteration. Let's do Transition Tuesday, shall we? But also, we were thinking, after talking recently, that it's the beginning of August in some parts of the country, students have gone back to school. Others have a couple of weeks before their summer is over. And it was a good opportunity to talk to parents of seniors and anybody, frankly, who wants to listen about the coming school year and what you can be thinking about for your students post high school life. And so, just to wrap my introduction up, I am Elizabeth Hamblet. I'm the founder of LD Advisory. You can follow me on most socials. And I have been a college learning disabilities specialist for more than 20 years now. I am the author of a book, which I should probably have up here. Let's see. No, 7 Steps to College Success, Pathway for Students with Disabilities. And maybe I'll even try and change my background while Kelley is talking. But anyway, I have lots of videos that you can watch for free on YouTube. There are more than 4 dozen free posts on my website all about college transition. I started a Substack recently. I'll put these all in the notes when we're done because I can't multitask. Lots of free information, but also you can read my book. You can watch my on-demand webinars for a small fee and look at my laminated guide, which is too far away to grab right now. It's kind of a quick and dirty for students. I think it's a great product. And you can hire me to speak to your school district or your organization, whatever. And so with that, let me turn the mic over to my friend Kelley, who will talk to you about her new endeavor.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for having me here today, and also for that extremely lovely introduction. I think my husband dislikes it anytime I have a conversation with Elizabeth because she often says that I'm smart. And it goes to my head a little bit when I get to talk to you because
You
I have a lot of, I think, mutual respect, but just so much respect for you, for the work that you do, for the honest information and accurate information that you put out to families, students, professionals about this transition to college, about what happens if you actually need accommodations, about how many students are actually not even accessing the things that they need during the transition. I mean, there's just so much that I have learned from you in the last several years. Your book is wonderful. It's literally 2 arms lengths away from me, so I couldn't grab it when you were talking about it without popping off screen. But I'm so excited to be here and be talking with you. And as Elizabeth mentioned, this is actually the very second day of my operating my own my own private practice, Challen Education and Transition Services. I have been a transition specialist for 12 years, but I've been professionally working with transition age students for more than 20 at this point. And you're probably wondering, what is a transition specialist? Because if you're not in this space, if you're not in the special education space, it may or may not be a term that resonates with you. But essentially, have a lot of expertise in thinking about helping students who've been on IEPs, students who've had special education services, think about transitioning to post-secondary adult life, and really focused on three important domains. We focus on how students can live more independently as they want to, as independently as they're capable of, how independents can pursue meaningful learning after high school, including college, and how students are going to eventually work, and what we're doing sort of now to prepare them for that. So I certainly started really niche in working with students with IEPs through that framework, but I work with a lot of students on IEPs, on 504 plans, students who have no special supports whatsoever, no disabilities, through the same frame every time, which is, who are you now? What do you know about yourself? What do you think you might want to do in the future for that living, learning, and working? And how can we take steps to progress toward that, right? And how can we empower you, the student, to be at the center of making these decisions, being in charge, and learning how to eventually sort of take these steps more and more independently, and also use the right support people along the way. So it's sort of a broad definition of what I do as a transition specialist, but I love my work, and I love getting to work with students throughout this transition. And I'm really, excited to be able to talk about this college transition today. My very early graduate work was getting licensed as a school counselor and really working on this college transition focus. So that's definitely always been an area of passion for me. Our students who are really thinking about pursuing college and how to make that successful for them, and the things that you can do way before the transition so that you are more set up to be successful.
Well, first of all, I mean, I love everything you said. And also, you let your husband know he can call me anytime to complain. Um, for those who aren't familiar with my work and sort of my background, I started my path to what I'm doing now in the late 90s as a high school special ed teacher and case manager. And I took a part-time job at a nearby college working in their disability services office. And the reason I want to tell you this is this people are getting a lot of bad information from others about what happens at college and what doesn't happen at college. And so I only learned that having been certified by my state, in special ed, once I started working at a college and realized that the laws in place were different, and different parts of laws were prevailed. And so having been so active online for 10 or 15 years now, I'm starting to hear and through presentations and meeting people what you guys are hearing from others, and so much of it is incorrect or it's missing certain nuances, and that is what formed the foundation, this drive to do the presentations, write about it. Now I make videos for you because I want to make sure that your student has the best possible preparation. And my focus is very specifically college. I'm not knowledgeable about, transition to other kinds of settings. But it's even as I'm hoping that information can be helpful in students who aren't sure what they want to do, understanding what the reality of the college environment is. But so often when I'm writing or I'm doing presentations for people about how we properly prepare students with disabilities for college, somebody will say to me inevitably, well, this is true for all students, and you alluded to that too, Kelley. And absolutely, yes, the preparation is pretty much the same. The reason I focus on, students with disabilities is sort of how I came through this process of, in my career. And also because, there are well-intentioned things happening at the high school level to help support students and help them achieve success. And those are valuable things, and I'm not here to trash them. But to make sure that as you ask for things for your students or somebody suggests accommodations or adjustments for your students, you folks also have a realistic view of what's going to happen with those if your student decides to come to college. So again, Kelley and I, in talking, and maybe we'll make this a more regular thing if you guys, find it helpful. And if you have friends who are not on Facebook, Let them know this will go up on my YouTube channel in a couple of weeks after my assistant fixes the captions. Kelley will have access to it for her purposes too. And also, if you're watching this on YouTube and you're a Facebook user or a social media user, find us somewhere else. So, with that, we thought we'd start with talking about some of the changes that happen as your student leaves K-12 and starts at post-secondary. This is the time of year in my work where students are getting ready. They're buying all the mattress toppers and the fans and all of that business. And one of the things I'm hoping is happening is that students with disabilities are registering for disability accommodations at their college. So again, trying to bring this back to, well, what does that have to do with my high school senior, Elizabeth, or my high school, student? Um, your student is going to have to register with us. And so this is a real opportunity to start thinking about what your student knows about their disability, um, how aware they are of what accommodations they are using. It can be an opportunity as they start high school this year to think about what accommodations are in place that may not serve them well as preparation for college. One of the things that I get into every single presentation is the fact that while extended time for papers and projects is common. Sorry, don't mind that you might hear some noise from my 17-year-old cat jumping up on my desk because she has no respect for my work. Um, that students with disabilities are often given extended deadlines, like more time to finish work that they do outside of class. That is not something that is commonly approved at the college level. And this is where this is what I'm talking about when I refer to the fact that you're either getting bad information or you're getting information that lacks nuance. And here's what I mean. So there are some students who get accommodated at college. And another thing I should start with is there are more than 4,000 colleges in the country. And you would think rightly that I was an idiot if I told you I knew what happened at every one of them. And I don't want to be quoted as saying this. So I've absolutely met students or parents of students with learning disabilities, with ADHD, with autism, who have been granted deadline extensions, whatever you call them, for their outside papers and projects. However, what I can tell you is in my community of professionals, when somebody posts about this or asks a question, of the people who respond, so with all of those caveats, many of them are saying they don't provide that accommodation for those students. But who does get it are students with physical/medical or mental health disabilities that have severe, unpredictable flare-ups. So at the time of a flare-up of one of those conditions, that student generally might get an extension on a paper that was due right now, but they will often have to contact the professor or reach out to disability. Processes vary. The laws have nothing to say about how this should look. But they get it's to deal with an unpredictable emergency. It is, even those students don't get what we call a blanket accommodation, where for any paper they have that will be due over the course of a semester, they get an extension. It's meant to it's meant to be available for these unpredictable emergencies. Now, if you have a student who is going to be out of classes and out of commission for a month because they have to have surgery, that is not an unpredictable emergency or an unpredictable flare up. And if you want to read my book, whoops, um, just to give you a sense of this, and this data unfortunately was last collected in 2010 because there was a new study done, a longitudinal study, the National Longitudinal Transitions Study. But because the government cut the funding in February, I don't expect to see any updated information. So at the time that this data was collected, 72% of students in this large national study got additional time to complete assignments in high school, and in college, only 6% of them did. So that gives you some very stark numbers. So What do you do with that information as your student enters senior year? You start working with them on meeting deadlines. You start working with them on calendar usage. You start talking to them about going through their syllabus. And if they have one, I realize it's high school and it's different. But when it's, asking them on a weekly basis, hey, did you get a big paper assigned? Like, can we, start to work on mapping that out? There's some interesting tools. And as I said, when this conversation is all over, I will try to drop all those links in the chat here. Online tools that help students plan out their papers over time. And so you could start to utilize this with your student, but now is the time. Now, a couple of other things that you need to be aware of. Neither an IEP nor a 504 plan, Kelley's laughing, is valid once your student graduates from high school. Some of you may know that IDEA only covers K-12 schools, and that's really important. IDEA simply does not apply at the college level. So what that means is while a college might ask to see your student's IEP, but they may not, and it may serve as a piece of what we call documentation, meaning it's the paperwork your student submits when they register with us, to show that they're a student with a disability, what their history is, what they're currently using. It's not a valid legal document anymore. We don't have to do anything that was written into an IEP. And so I'm mentioning this in the context of this conversation because sometimes people will, say to each other in an online forum, what accommodations should I make sure are in my kid's senior IEP to make sure they'll have it at college? That is not how that works. Now, 504 plans, people understandably don't, misunderstand what happens. Colleges are subject to 504, but we are under a different subpart. We are under subpart E, not subpart D. And so for the same reasons, that 504 plan is not valid. And so before you drop in the chat, but my student went to college and they gave him a 504 plan. They can call what colleges can call anything a 504 plan. It is not the 504 plan from high school. And so do not rely on getting stuff written into your kid's senior year plan with the thought that that means we will have to abide by it. Colleges will determine for ourselves what accommodations we think are appropriate, and we will grant them or not grant your student's request. So I'm going to turn this over to Kelley. And just a reminder, if you're watching us live on Facebook, if you want to drop a question in there for us, and I see one already that I cannot answer, Kate, but give me a minute. Drop them in the chat. So, maybe Kelley has some information I do not. And I've been working in disability services offices, like I said, for more than 20 years. Kate asked, can you discuss the intersection between athletes and disabilities and how best to work with the two offices? That is a great question. I don't have any experience, except that I have occasionally worked with athletes at a previous job. Um, you know, I don't, I'm just thinking, we had a big football team and I have worked with athletes in my individual capacity as a learning specialist, at various schools, but, the one thing I can say positively is that in my anecdotal experience, often athletes have to go to required study halls, which can be very useful. That has nothing to do with us, but sometimes the structure that the teams, demands place on them can be challenging in that they often have very little time to get work done. We don't provide accommodations because you're an athlete and things are slow generally. Again, your mileage may vary. But I've seen some schools be very supportive of athletes and maybe even provide some tutoring that nobody else gets access to. So that's a great question.
I had the I had the
Please.
same thought that you had, Elizabeth,
Yeah.
which is where I've seen that be helpful for some students is the mandatory study
Yeah.
time and the fact that that's being done with peers. So there's almost a peer pressure to actually be getting your academics done, which I think can be really
Yeah.
helpful for some of our students
Absolutely.
who have challenges with executive dysfunction or other things. I think the thing to really think about, and you talked about this a little bit, is just this idea that colleges are not built identically, right? So the athletics
Mhm.
department and the disability services at any, I'm picturing like a Venn diagram, right? Of sort of like there's going to be a certain amount that the student of support and pressure that the student's getting related to being an athlete. There may
Mm,
be a certain amount
yeah.
of available support if you are
Hmm.
registered with disability services and you qualify for accommodations. And so I think the same way that that student is vetting colleges, really thinking about how they're going to fit with a particular sports team, with a particular college, culture on that sports team, you want to vet the disability services office, just as intensively. The
Hmm.
student really needs to know what has helped them to be a successful student in high school. Hopefully, hopefully there are things that have helped them to actually be quite successful with their classes. Hopefully they know what accommodations are useful for them, and really, checking that those things are available and that they are accessible as a student athlete, right? Just sort of making sure that both of those pieces work together for the student, I think, is going to be so important. And it's going to be an individual process, checking in with each college that student's really considering.
Yeah.
Don't assume that because a student with a similar profile had a great time being a lacrosse player at a particular university, that's going to apply at any other university, or even for a different student at the same university, because all of this is really individualized in terms of what supports and services a student might get.
Yeah, and that's true, for everybody. One thing I have seen, so part of my job is I work individually with students registered with our office. And sometimes when I'm helping them plan, they're going to be on a bus for 12 hours one weekend. And so, student athletes, again, have the benefit of some structure because practice is at whatever time it is, and they work their assignment, completion around that stuff, around those events. But at the same time, sometimes entire, weekends are taken up with team stuff. And so it might be appropriate if a student is allowed, and then academic eligibility, for athletic stuff, I know plays in here sometimes. Like if they can take a reduced course load at least to start, may be a good choice because while they're adjusting to the demands of college and whatever the demands of the athletic program are, having less to do, I'm somebody who could never read on a bus, so I would really struggle to get some stuff done. Kelley, I think this is a question for you. Somebody asked about MAIPSE, which I assume is a Massachusetts thing. So talk to me about that.
Well, I couldn't figure out if they meant MAICEI. I actually put a question back there
Okay.
in the chat.
And what is MAICEI?
Oh, um, well, Macy is an inclusive concurrent enrollment program in Massachusetts, although there are inclusive enrollment programs at colleges now across the country.
Okay.
And like one of the best resources for students who have intellectual disability or developmental disability, or autism, and maybe not able to participate in a competitive four-year college in a traditional manner, are that we have these inclusive concurrent enrollment programs in Massachusetts. If it's part of this MACI, MAICEI
Yeah.
initiative, then
Okay.
there's actually funding support for students to be able to do that. Sometimes that's a partnership between a particular community college or four-year college and a set of school districts or a certain district, so that a student can actually use their IEP transition services, some funding from the state, to be able to take college classes before they have completed their special education. But then there are also these inclusive college programs all over the United States that students can participate in after high school, that are really wonderful opportunities for students to have a college experience, often get great vocational training, improve their self-determination skills, which we haven't talked a lot about self-advocacy, but we need to.
We need to, yeah.
um, and be able to also build those independent living skills, and be inclusive part of the community, which we know helps with success in adulthood. So I think that might be what that was a reference to. If not, feel free to type in additional questions,
Yeah.
so that we can get on that track.
So, I'm going to sort of wrap this opening a little bit. If you would like to learn more, and if you have any, specific questions about accommodations, you can drop them in the chat. You can also read my book, watch the webinars, find the free posts on my website, or, my videos. But there's a lot to learn. I've only shared this one with you because I think it's such an important one, and it feels very widespread to me, the deadline extensions. I've dropped in the chat the short video I've made and the written post about deadline extensions if you want to learn more. But really, we're here to talk about what are you going to do? And the reason I have Kelley is I know the college stuff. I haven't worked in a high school since literally the last millennium. So, Kelley is here to talk about how she works with high school seniors and the kinds of things that you can be thinking about. So, Kelley, we talked about how senior year of high school really matters more than ever. And, why does it matter so much? What have you seen happen when students don't get the right preparation? What does it look like when they do get the right preparation?
Yeah, I think there are, I mean, there are a lot of us who work with students in high school or in this transition between high school and college who try to think about like what are the most important skills that students need to make this transition, right? And so you'll see different ways of classifying things. But there's no question that there are some skills that the more you have developed those in high school, the more likely you are to be successful with the transition, right? And one of the things that I think you sort of mentioned, Elizabeth, is time management, right? That students have to actually have some way of managing a schedule. I'm a huge fan of students learning to use a web-based calendar because that's accessible on any device the student's using. It can have reminders and prompts and other things. And that's a really like detailed kind of an idea, but I think that ends up being important, right? Adults need some way to manage their time. Building that while you're still in high school is helpful because college is a really unstructured period of time.
Oh,
And so you got a
right.
lot of time to manage, way more time than students are used to managing, way more time than students 15 years ago were used to managing.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because it's not that it's more time, it's a bigger jump, right? Our students between ninth and 12th grade now in the United States are much more scheduled, right? The world is much more scheduled than it was, historically. So it's a much bigger jump. Students are not used to having unstructured time. Students are used to
Mm.
having, especially students on IEPs or 504 plans, are used to having structured studies or sometimes multiple structured studies during the day.
Wow.
Now they have to
Okay.
figure out how to fit their study time in. So I think the earlier, but especially by senior year, the earlier we can really be thinking about what are the activities the student's going to have to do as a freshman in college, and how
Mm.
can we shift their skills and shift some of how they're tackling school and extracurricular activities now to be just slightly more similar. The more that student is building some of the experience they have. I mean, I have a note here, like sort of capitals with underline, waking up on time, right? Like if a student is heading into 12th grade this year
Yeah.
and you're the alarm clock as a parent, or your parents the alarm clock if you're a student watching this, that's something to really think about. I mean, I've had
Yeah.
students who had just completely, I'm going to use a word that's probably not a word, unreplicable, I don't know,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But
I
but
approve. Yeah.
morning routines, right, where like a pet comes in to say hello for an hour before a parent is
Yeah.
waking up a student, and
Sure.
like just things that are not going to be possible in any other setting than living with your parents. And
Hmm.
that has to really be thought about of, can the student reliably wake up? Some students, cell phone is an alarm, but then if a cell phone's going off all night, learning to use like a real alarm clock might be a better option for some people.
Hmm.
So figuring out, some of those life skills related to time management are so important. I mean, the other thing are those self-advocacy skills that we have kind of mentioned, but not talked in depth about, but really thinking about, if a student is heading into 12th grade and has a disability, honestly, whether it's accommodated or not accommodated, or they're on a 504 or on an IEP, like you really need to think about what students know about themselves, their labels, how those labels
Yeah,
impact them, and whether they're going to need accommodations. Some of this is because, as we mentioned before, I mean, you want to be thinking about what accommodations and supports you need as you go through your college process, but
right.
you also want to be reducing the accommodations that aren't possible once you exit a high school. I mean, so I've often talk about, like, I worked with one student who had an accommodation written on the IEP, and actually this wasn't just one student; it was multiple students in a similar location who had accommodations that were literally that teachers could not grade them below a particular grade. And that's not, I can see the look of horror on Elizabeth's face.
Every time I think I've heard
Right.
the wildest, there's a new one. Yeah,
I
okay.
know. And that's, I mean,
Oh,
if you really think
okay.
about that, that's not an accommodation, right? Like, that's
Right.
avoidance of some sort of skills that that student needs to
Yeah.
have to be a successful student later. So I
Wow.
really try to look at each accommodation that's on students, plan,
Hmm.
and figure out, like, is this actually an adult doing something that the student needs to be able to do for themselves? Could this be, adjusted slightly so that it's an accommodation that's more likely to be possible in a post-secondary
Hmm.
setting? I mean, this is definitely the time to be looking at 504 plans and IEPs, and even just daily life, and thinking about how students are being accommodated, whether those are real written down accommodations or just things that we do for, for our own
Oh,
children to get through the day, and
uh,
just trying to reduce
yeah.
them.
I mean, of course, every time I talk to you, I have 1,000 thoughts. So, first of all, I think what we both want to be clear on too. When we talk about something, like the accommodation Kelley just mentioned, and I've seen colleagues say they have students who have been allowed to retake tests for better grades. This is not us judging the accommodation itself, the people who grant it. Everybody has a reason why they give students certain accommodations. And one of the things that we talk about in my field all the time is, and I describe it as a tension because that's how I experience it. The tension between K-12 and post-secondary arises from the mandates of the relevant laws. So IDEA is supposed to help students meet the requirements. If I can't quite remember the exact wording of the purposes that you can find in the law, but basically allow students to meet the educational standards of the local education, LEA. I can't remember what that stands for. I'm sure Kelley knows.
Authority.
Yes, local education authority. So there's a lot of stuff that happens to help students sometimes pass classes, meet whatever, again, the standards are for a district. At the college level, we don't have those mandates. We are there, 504 and ADA are anti-discrimination laws, and they are there to require us to prevent discrimination against students with disabilities and address it when it arises. And so we have vastly different mandates. And again, if you want to look at my book, in step one, I go into great detail about what Section 504 says. Here's part of how you know if somebody really knows what they're talking about when they're talking to you about college accommodations. Most of the guidance for colleges comes from Section 504, Subpart D. I'm sorry, excuse me, Subpart E. I can't believe I did that. Not the ADA. So people are saying, well, the ADA says this and the ADA requires that. It probably doesn't. Much of the specific stuff for colleges is in 504. Another thing to think about is if accommodations like the ones that we are talking about are truly necessary for your student, for instance, to be able to stay enrolled in a general ed class in high school. You want them to have that experience for social reasons, for educational reasons. We're not telling you to pull those. But what we are trying to say is you need to talk to the student and say, this is not something that will be available to you after high school. We have it here to try to help you, be successful and have these experiences. Would you rather keep this and know that, the transition to college might be a little bit more challenging as a result when you don't have these supports? Or is now a time that you would like to, fade this out and we will try to provide you with the instruction you need to make up for that, if it's note taking skills or it's time management skills. But make sure the student is aware. We're talking about self-awareness, right? Self-advocacy skills. And they need that information. If you are withholding from them the idea that a lot of this stuff won't be available to them, you're depriving them of the opportunity to make decisions.
Yeah. And I think about, I mean, one of the things we had talked about um, is what this looks like, when it's done well and what it looks like
Mm,
when it's not quite done as well. And I think that the hardest thing is the student who has been getting quite a bit of support and is unaware of that support.
mm-hmm,
And
mm,
when the gap between them selecting an appropriate college or being able to be successful at college is really based on the fact that they don't know I
yeah.
mean, sometimes they don't know they have a diagnosis. Sometimes they don't know that they're
Yeah.
receiving
Yeah.
accommodations. Sometimes they think that the support services that they're getting are typically available in other settings. Some families think that too. And so, I've had students where, I mean, bright students who were just being accommodated, truly overly accommodated.
Mm,
And then, got into really competitive technical college, I mean, really prestigious colleges, which is wonderful. But then, I had a student who started at a pretty competitive technical college. That was unsuccessful. Then,
mm,
and so what happened was they sort of dropped down and looked for, okay, what's missing? Okay, we'll go to a college that has a support program that's specific for the disability that, the student has. So they tried that, then that didn't work. So then they
oh
dropped
dear.
down to a
Okay.
state college and that
Okay.
didn't work. And then the
Oh,
student ended up
wow.
being
Okay.
successful taking one college class at a time at a community college. And I will say I wasn't working with that student all through all of those transitions. Unfortunately, I'd worked with that student in high school, and then I got the student 5 years later after all of this had happened.
Mm,
Um, and I understand the thinking, right? Like this is this is too hard. We'll try the next level down. But if we had really started with what does this student need to successfully pass a college class in terms of
mhm,
accommodations, in terms of how many courses they could juggle at the same time, in terms of whether they could actually be living in a dorm and passing college classes at the same
yeah.
time, or if they needed some skill development before that. A lot of time, a lot of
Mhm.
money,
Wow.
and frankly, some self-esteem and other things could have been saved. And I think sometimes people think, oh, if I talk with, a student or my child about disability or diagnosis, or that they, have these accommodations they get, it's going to make them feel bad about themselves. But it feels far worse to be repeatedly failing in different environments and not have any idea why,
Mhm,
or that you could be successful, or that you're entitled to things that you're not taking advantage of. So
mhm.
um, I mean, I just that's sort of an extreme example, but I think there are often those little situations where what most often happens, right, is students get in over their head because they either didn't register, didn't
Oh, yeah,
register with
and the
Disability Support
research shows
Services,
that.
didn't access accommodations, right?
Yep.
Um, thought that they could just put them in place if they needed them, which isn't really true. You don't get a redo with a test that you failed, in your first
No.
month of college. You can
No.
only
Yep.
start from the point in time when you actually access something. So it's not something where you want to wait and see. It's something where you want to put it in place. And if you don't need it, that's lovely.
Right.
Um, so I think, a lot of times then what happens is students end up having to take a semester off or a year off and kind of reconfigure their understanding of what they need. And sometimes students end up right back at the same college, but they're using the appropriate accommodations later. Um,
And and
because
that's
it's
a
not an
crucial
option.
difference too. And so for those of you, whether you're watching on Facebook, I'm dropping in the comments. If you're watching on YouTube, go to the description here, some links. So I've got a post on my website. All that stuff is free about this issue of transparency and why it is so important to talk to your students before they leave high school. Frankly, no matter what they're doing after high school, because self-advocacy is necessary in the workplace. It's necessary whatever you're going to do in adult life. And so if we deprive students of the vocabulary and self-understanding, we're really doing them a disservice. And I agree with you 100%, Kelley. I think having a student have failure experiences, because we have kept, so many supports in place and not prepared them is not in the end doing them, doing right by them. And once again, everybody involved, high school faculty and parents have the best intentions. They want to see students shine. They want to see them do well. But that's why we're here to talk about the realities of the college environment. So, let's talk a little bit more about skills, and we're going to leave some time at the end for questions. So if you're watching this on Facebook, go ahead and drop your questions in the chat about what are you thinking you need to do with your high school senior this year to get them ready for college? Do you have a question for Kelley? But Kelley, let's talk about, so we've talked about self-advocacy, time management, or what else are we
A
missing?
little bit about life skills, although just
Ooh.
thinking about, I mean, one of the questions I always have for families is, has your student ever had an overnight away from home? And
Mhm.
and that's always an interesting one. I mean, I think it's one of the reasons those inclusion experiences are so important in high school, right? If there are class trips, to places, I want any student I'm working with to be going on those kinds of trips or having an overnight experience, or maybe we plan for students to do an overnight summer program on a college campus before they're actually college students, or you can do pre-college kinds of programs. But if a student's never had a roommate before, even for a night, especially if it's an only child, or not successfully been away from home, even at family members' houses, other things like that's something try to think about, like, how would that go? Why would that be successful or not successful? Also, like, why do you think it's going to be successful going and living
Mm.
in a dorm, which is unlike any other living environment that we ever live in our entire lives? So just for students to really understand a little bit more about that, and building like the basics, do I know how to wash sheets? I might know how to wash my clothes, but do I actually have any idea how to wash and dry sheets, or that I have to change those, or, you
And
know,
as you'll see from parent forums, just because they know doesn't guarantee that they will, but you want to send them knowing.
yeah, personal choice is certainly a big piece here. I think, I always laugh, sometimes parents get focused on, oh, my kid doesn't know how to cook like a full dinner for our family.
Oh,
And that's
wow.
not,
Yeah.
that may or may not matter when you're in college,
Right.
but do they know how to cook a couple of things that they like to eat, just in case, or are they, how are they going to do with the dining room experience? It's always really important to like eat on a college campus as you're doing college exploration and senior year, like just getting that feeling, because again, college cafeterias are quite unlike, it's probably not even the right word for it, the quite unlike what a high school might be like, depending on how big or small high school students went to. So just trying to get at, like, can a student get through the day? Do they know how to purchase like a toiletry or shirts for themselves? I've worked with a lot of students who have no idea what their shoe size is as 12th grader. I know.
Interesting. Yeah, okay.
And
Like
again,
just
like
look
students who
at
are
the big.
very
Yeah.
capable of getting into competitive colleges, but there are ways that we sometimes prioritize students being in rigorous academic classes, and then they don't learn what their shoe size is. And so just making sure that if you haven't really kind of thought about some of the life skills that it takes to be a college student,
Mm-hmm.
that is something that is thought about and talked about and practiced in senior year. And then
Mm-hmm.
a big one, and it's really, I mean, this is for all students, what research shows, not just for students with disabilities, but these like healthy habits, sleep routine, exercise of some sort. Fortunately, many college campuses, the exercise is like built in, right? For
Yeah.
some students, if they need a lot of exercise to regulate, it's like, great, pick a bigger college campus. So you have to walk 15 or 20 minutes, between classes, and you're more regulated when you get to the class. But it's, sleep, exercise, and also diet to some degree. I mean, we're talking about teenagers and young adults. And so diet's not always perfect with this demographic, but again, like, do students know enough to get themselves fed in a meaningful way?
Mm-hmm.
And I just, if students are used to exercising to a high degree, but it's in a structure, they're on sports teams in high school, but they're not going to be in college or things like that,
Mm-hmm.
just really thinking about, do students have some of the habits they need to make that transition successfully? And I think I'm going to circle back actually to um, the comment in the chat from Lume that was about Macy or MAPSI, which was those inclusive college learning experiences. I think what that may have been getting at, which is really important, is when students are in high school, having opportunities to try things that are similar to college is one way
Mhm.
to bridge this transition more successfully. So for students who are actually on IEPs or who may have some IEP based transition services after 12th grade, the opportunities to try a college class before you're a full time college student can be really meaningful.
Mhm.
Any student may have, the option to try a summer college course or dually enroll in a course or do early college or other things like that. And sometimes, scaffolding this process and thinking about that for students as they're heading into senior year is really important. Like,
Mhm.
is this a student? I think we have this. Actually, just wrote just wrote an article on Substack about this weekend. As we're heading into college application season, let's make sure that students know that they have a variety of options after 12th grade, right? So for the students heading into 12th grade this year, a skill is it, or I guess a knowledge that I want them to have is just that there are a variety of ways to make this transition. There are a variety of steps that you can take after high school. And if your step immediately after high school isn't directly into a four-year residential college, that doesn't mean that that's not a step or set of steps on your pathway. It just means you're sort of creating a pathway, honestly, that's probably going to be more successful and individualized, because students who do a gap year experience or volunteer, have a work experience or try college classes before, I mean, we see lots of success for students who actually take time to take a step in between. And so I want 12th grade students to know that that's an option.
And I'm dropping in the chat, and for YouTube watchers, it'll be in the description here, links to both a written post and then the annual webinar that my friends Jane and Jason Soroyan, the founders of J2 Guides, do every year, and I'll be scheduling that with them soon for the fall. So, just like with college, if you're interested in gap experiences for your student, which doesn't have to mean that you spend a fortune sending them to Europe while you stay home and work. Um, uh, you can read this and watch their video and follow me to see when the next one, or follow Jane and Jason to see when the next live webinar will be. But you want to ask questions about that, because even though they're not colleges, gap experiences have their expectations for students and, some limitations as far as what they can provide. Yeah, I mean, Kelley, your Substack is so, so good. I've dropped that in the chat and the description as well. I get so excited every time I see Kelley's posted something new. I never know what I'm going to learn from her, but it's always good. Because she's really been doing this work for a long time. I am very experienced in telling you about the realities of the college experience, but I really, and again, looking back at my high school years, years of teaching high school, I was working with students a bit on time management, but, really didn't know what I know now about the differences in the accommodations and supports, and worry that I wasn't giving them the proper, preparation for college. Let me just see. I don't think we've been getting any questions, but let me double check where we are with this. And also, if you see this now or you find us later, if you want to drop a comment in the chat and let us know if you found this helpful and whether we should do it again, because we will be willing to do it if people find the information helpful. Um,
Can I just,
Kelley, go
oh,
ahead,
I was going to
please.
say, I mean,
Yeah.
we talked a little bit about some of the supports that students might have that may or may not be able to be replicable at
Mm,
the college level. I mean, I think one of the things that I see that is sometimes a concern for me, but it depends how and why it's being carried out. And I'd really love
mhm,
to know what you think about this, is when a student still has a one-to-one aide in the
mhm.
classroom with
Yeah.
them, especially in 12th grade. They're in a gen ed classroom, but they have a one-to-one aide with them, or like really high level of support. Maybe there's an aide in there for two students in the classroom.
Hmm.
What options are available for that student when they transition to college?
So, first of all, colleges don't provide that person. That's a great question. We do not provide aides to students. So when students need an aide, it still has to be approved. And there will be limitations on what that person can do for the student and how they interact. For instance, in a classroom, there can't be a lot of conversation between, the aide and the student. But essentially, the student will have to find that person, and if it's not a family member, and it can be, um, pay that person. And so this is not something I have real experience with where I've worked over 20 something years. I've never had to deal with that question. Now, so and students have aids for different reasons. So if it is a student who has a physical or medical condition who needs a nurse to come in and provide treatments, or somebody who, because a student does not have use of their hands, or bathe them, help them toilet, eat, those students again can have permission to have that person come to campus and help them out. But you know, I'm trying to think of any specific examples I've seen in my community because I haven't dealt with it. But for students with autism or ADHD, the redirection has to be subtle. If that's what the problem is, there can't be a lot of discussion around it because at college, remember that K-12 is mandatory. We have to make adjustments to allow students to stay in the setting. But college is not. And so when a student, if they themselves, and this is any student, frankly, has proven such a distraction that it is disruptive to the class, they may not be eligible to stay in that class. And so the interactions between aide and student, again, have to be subtle. They might need permission or a security check, excuse me, if they're going into the dorm, if again, for the student who needs physical assistance. Was there anything else you were thinking of, Kelley?
No, I think they're just, again, it's that piece where um, we we sometimes have ideas that something's going to be available in college because it's
Yeah.
so, I don't want to say easily available, because oftentimes one-to-one support, that's a really high level of support. So that's
Mhm.
something that a team would have had to have been really thoughtful about putting in place.
Right.
But especially if we are heading into 12th grade, but even honestly in ninth grade, if I have students who have one-to-one support, I really want to understand, why does that student require one-to-one assistance
Mm,
at this point in
that's
time?
such a good question, Kelley.
And what is that one-to-one person actually doing in the classroom, right?
Hmm.
If a one-to-one professional is sitting directly next to a student in a general ed class, and
Hmm.
anytime the student has a question, they're asking that one-to-one professional, and the one-to-one professionals, maybe prompting them to stand, like, it just sort of depends how much interaction is needed with that
Hmm.
person. um, to really think about, is this a student who can be successful in a college classroom, one
Hmm.
year from now, right? And so much of that depends on not just, is this particular service on an IEP, but why is the service on the IEP, and how is it being
Hmm.
used, and how can we maybe fade that back? And as you said, I mean, there are often physical and medical reasons that's a totally appropriate support, and a student will hire someone to fill that capacity in college. But sometimes there are behavioral, attentional, executive
Hmm.
function, social reasons that the support's being provided, and we really have to think about what, I mean, sometimes even if that person is actually in some ways preventing the student from building the skills that they need to
Mm.
successfully be in a more traditional or inclusive kind of setting. So
That's a great lead in too, to think about even for students whose disability perhaps is more moderate or mild than that. If you have adults who are meeting with your student, multiple times a week, and I think you wrote a great post about this, or I think, was it a post or a comment, Kelley, about, ADHD coaches maybe and what they should be doing. So send that to me and I'll drop it in the chat. Or if you can do that there. But about how are they helping and what are they demanding of students when they sit down for sessions? Is the student, directing the session, or is somebody saying, okay, asking them those prompting questions? Senior year is a really good time to start thinking about how those meetings go and
yeah.
what the demands are, because yes, you can pay for fee-based programs, and yes, you can pay your executive functioning coach to, Zoom with your student. But for me, the confidence piece is really important as your students move into college. I want them to know that they can function, not perfectly, because nobody does, but function independently without a bunch of adults sort of at their fingertips, because that confidence is what they're going to need. Because there will be times they're up at 2 o'clock in the morning and your executive functioning coach is not going to be available to them. So, we want them to go knowing that they're capable, because self-efficacy, which is this psychological concept about the more you think you can do, the more you are likely to do. And the more you do, the more you are likely to think you can do, is really important for that. I want them to have confidence and competence. Actually practicing stuff and getting used to it is what builds the confidence.
And ability to cope when it's,
Oh, yeah, the emotional
when
piece.
there's to cope long enough, with a problem that you can't solve, or, like if you have that EF disaster at 2 a.m. in the morning, to think,
Mm-hmm.
okay, there is somebody who can help me with this at 7 a.m., right? I can't call them now.
Maybe
what
not
are
seven, but
the
yeah.
things I can do now independently, and then, have a plan in place for the time when I can access other help. So I think, yes, we want students to know themselves, to know where their strengths are, to know, what they
Mm-hmm.
can cope with, to know,
Yeah.
and to be able to do as many things as independently as possible, but also realistically know what the supports are and how to access those when those are needed.
Yeah.
Um, I saw a question come in, if it's okay,
Yeah,
Elizabeth,
please,
on
because we're going to wrap up in a
the
minute. Yeah.
question from Diane that said, do you
Yeah.
suggest online college if being in a regular college would be too much? And I love that idea. And it's one of the things that I will often talk about, sometimes as part of transition services, or sometimes for students in a year between high school and college, is why don't you try one online class and try one in-person class? And oftentimes I say, let's try classes that are areas of high interest, because sometimes students can be much more successful in person in a class that's really high interest for them, depending on the student and their profile. Um, to get a sense of like what the better modality is for the student. There are absolutely some students who historically I think wouldn't have necessarily gotten a 4-year degree when we really only had in-person learning opportunities, who for attention or anxiety or behavior, I say behavior, but it's just sort of like social behavior being disruptive to the classroom, like just wouldn't have been able to get through an in-person setting successfully, who do beautifully with online degrees. But then I
Mm-hmm.
also tend to think about, if that degree's online, what is that student going to be doing for employment later, and where are they getting those social opportunities and inclusive opportunities while they're doing that degree online? But yeah, I mean, online can cut down on a whole host of, sensory,
Sure.
hearing, all sorts of kinds of challenges for students. So sometimes that's the absolute right academic trajectory for students. And that's something we should be figuring out while those students are still in high school. And I didn't mention this, Elizabeth, when you were talking about J2J and the wonderful gap year consulting that they do. Where my area of expertise is often for families is in exactly this space of just like assessing whether students are ready to make the transition to college, and
Mm-hmm.
when students actually need um, more of an extension of some services that they
Mm-hmm.
might still need as part of special education, or we need to intensify what they're getting as part of special education, or when we need to supplement to make sure that students are going to be on the right trajectory, or also finding sometimes a transition program or a young adult program to go right in between high school and a college experience when students have a certain amount of skill development, especially
Mm-hmm.
for families in Massachusetts and New England. But I do work
Mm-hmm.
remotely all over the country.
Um, I was having a thought about, and the one thing I would just as somebody who, worked through COVID, with college and graduate students, one thing to think about too is like some students, you know, don't want to have their cameras on during live classes. So, the way that the online education is delivered is something to think about too. Some students, if it's asynchronous, meaning you don't show up to a live lecture, you just watch the lectures as you go, struggle with that because there isn't any sort of impetus like, oh gosh, class is at 2 o'clock on Tuesdays. And so they don't actually get around to watching the lectures, and then they're trying to, rush through them all at once. So these are, the only things I can suggest. And we have one last question and we're going to wrap up. But Kelley, when the challenges are executive functioning maturity, is there a recommended format for a support program to begin? Like, do you go heavier because you think the student needs it because early success is important?
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, some of this depends on your risk tolerance and your students' risk
yeah,
tolerance,
I
but
think that's
but
well said.
I
Yeah.
think, like my style professionally for lots of reasons is to do exactly that, is to think about like, let's put the coaching in place that we think is most likely to be needed by the student. I mean, I'm a huge fan of, if a student's making a transition to college, say in fall of 2026, the latest I would want to start working with an executive function coach would probably be spring or summer of 2026,
Wow.
because frankly, enrollment activities for college is a huge executive functioning exercise. I mean, getting your picture for
Such
your
a good
ID. Now you got
point.
to do medical form. You got to take this particular alcohol course on this
Right.
day, right? Like, it's just the tasks keep coming. And so it's a great opportunity for students to learn about what systems they can use for managing those different task completion activities. And then it's also because there's so much to get in place for a student with executive functioning challenges. There's so much to get in place that you want, like, in place either just before you hit the college campus or right when you hit the college campus. And you want to know what supports you're going to use. You want to figure out if you're taking the right amount of classes and the right classes really early. If you need to drop a course without a financial penalty, like that has to be pretty quickly. Or you may have to get an accommodation. It really depends on the particular university and how many courses are required and other things. So I think there's a lot to juggle and figure out early, including again that like wide open schedule and when to put the classes and when to put the study times, and how to get into student groups you want to, and how do you even sign up for tutoring. Like, there's so many different things to get in place. I think putting more coaching in, especially as a student's making that first transition, is so important. The reality is sometimes we can get enough systems in place that not every student's going to need that kind of support all the way through college. Sometimes students just need the support at the beginnings of semesters. Sometimes they just need it for the first year and a half of school. But college is expensive, not just financially but emotionally.
Mhm.
um, and one of the best ways to save on emotional and financial exhaustion is to try to complete that degree as close to on time as possible. And we haven't mentioned this at all, but I often try to remind people, colleges don't report their graduation statistics in terms of 4-year graduation rates. They're usually reporting 6-year graduation rates, sometimes
Yep.
5.
Yep. Yep.
And on the parent side, like, you don't realize that necessarily when you're vetting schools, that they're telling you the percentage of students that get out of there with a 4-year degree in 6 years. And so you may not be financially planning for that. So again, I'd put the investment into the EF coach early, because you
Hmm.
can actually end up saving on resources, and the student can just feel more confident as they're handling a whole bunch of unexpected stuff. And sometimes a student's going to be more honest in a one-on-one relationship with somebody that they've already started before they hit the campus than than they will be with somebody like Elizabeth, who's working with them and in disability support services. But it just depends. So that was a really long-winded answer, and it's a really personal decision, but that tends to be what I recommend.
And I'm just dropping in the chat, and we'll do the same with the description. There are two free blog posts on my site about college-based fee for service programs. There's also a video on my YouTube channel about on and off campus programs. So there are lots of different options, but also your student has to buy into it. So, well-meaning, loving parents set their students, up with somebody, and then the students no show. And so that can, you got to try to have some honest conversations with your students about, like, if I'm paying this person, I'm going to pay whether you turn up or not. So, and if you're paying for college, you can have discussions about what your expectations are and what's going to happen when those first term grades, come in, and what that's going to mean if they haven't accessed the supports. So, the only thing I would add for Meredith is, if the maturity by senior year is not really there, and they're needing a lot of support from adults to just kind of stay on track, a year to mature might be good. A way to assess that is to have them, live at home and attend a local, whether it's a community or another kind of college, but to demonstrate to you that they are going to do all this life skill stuff we talked about, take care of themselves, get up, get to class on time, and do what they need to do before you spend even more money to have them live somewhere, be far away, perhaps at a more expensive school, because, it's a lot of money, and it's the failure experiences can be real too. So with that, be sure to check out Kelley's website, find her on socials. She's constantly making wonderful, helpful videos and written posts. Her Substack is one I subscribe to and recommend to everybody. You can hire Kelley to work with your student and get access to her all her knowledge. And for me, I've already dropped my stuff in the chat as well. If you really want to get a sense of what the college environment looks like, my book is the best way to do it. I walk you through 7 steps to college success. And we talk not just about the academic skills they need, but all of those personal skills too that we discussed today. So Kelley, we want to wrap us up?
Thank you so much for having me, Elizabeth. Yeah, I will actually drop some things in the chat after the conversation. I am not as, even though Elizabeth said she has trouble with multitasking, I think I have far more trouble with multitasking. So, but my website is just Challen, Challen transitions.com. And definitely, if you're a professional watching, feel free to connect with either one of us on LinkedIn. I love that we're both very active on there. That's one of the ways I think we became better friends. And then, certainly Instagram and Facebook and YouTube and all those good
And
things.
all those things. We
um,
sometimes sleep.
so thank you. And just, I think sometimes we look and we think, okay, there's 5 million things we need to work on. Just pick one. And what I recommend is pick the one the student's most motivated to start working on first. That's always the starting point. Doesn't matter if you think it's the most important or not. If they think it's the most important, that's where you start.
I love that. I love that. All right, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.